So we now find, we find Savitri really becoming aware of her role in this evolutionary experience. And in that role, she has to face so many things. And so, as memory's casements open on the hours and the tired feet of thought approach her doors, all came back to her: earth and love and doom. The ancient disputants encircled her like giant figures wrestling in the night. The Godheads from the dim inconscient born awoke to struggle and the pang divine. And in the shadow of her flaming heart, at the somber center of the dire debate, a guardian of the unconsoled abyss, inheriting the long agony of the globe, a stone-still figure of high and godlike pain, stared into space with fixed, regardless eyes that saw grief's timeless depths, but not life's goal. Well, would you like to say something first, Vladimir?
Well, it's very true to our life, yes. So
Very
to say.
true. Very true. Well, the ancient disputants, there have always been these giant figures, these disputants, who challenge the reason for the evolution. Many of them are very happy just where they are. If they're gods, they have a given power, and that power is something they cherish. But the Godheads born from the dim inconscient, these Godheads awake to the struggle and the divine pang. And in the shadow of her flaming heart, at the somber center of the dire debate, the debate of these giant figures wrestling, what is at the center of that? Very strange thing. A guardian of the unconsoled abyss. Now, this guardian of this abyss that is unconsoled inherits the long agony of the globe. It's a stone-still figure of high and godlike pain who stares into space with eyes that, regardless is a different kind of word here. It's not something that he disregards, but he doesn't regard.
Indifferent, yeah.
Indifferent, I would say, is a better word. Yes, a better synonym. Yeah. And he stares into space with fixed, regardless eyes that saw grief's timeless depths, but not life's goal. Well, I feel that this whole passage is talking about us on earth. The struggle and the pangs that we have to go through, that Savitri is now taking up in her being. And she has to face all of these. Well, she has to be at the center of the dire debate also, But she has to face the struggle and the pang, even though the pang is divine. But we can't understand that because we have not yet reached the point where pain for us can be joy and pleasure. Sri Aurobindo reached it, and he speaks quite coherently about it, as always, that one can transform even the worst pain into joy and bliss. So this being who is a stone still figure of high and godlike pain. See, now it's godlike pain also. So there's the bang divine and there's godlike pain, staring into space, and he only sees grief. He doesn't see he sees the timeless depths of grief, which is, there's no end to the depth of grief. But some of us see life's goal, or at least we feel it. We feel that there is more than grief, although we've all had our share of it, and some of us in plenty. But now we come to a passage which is almost impossible for us to put our heads around, as they say. And I'd like someone to read this. Can anyone volunteer? Edith?
Yes, I'll be happy to read.
Good.
Afflicted by his harsh divinity, bound to his throne, he waited unappeased the daily oblation of her unwept tears. All the fierce question of man's hours relived. The sacrifice of suffering and desire earth offers to the immortal ecstasy began again beneath the eternal hand.
Well, now we see what's happening. Now we see what exactly. And, well, this is what Mother came to face and to conquer. On page 7, we read an awful lot about the sons of God who are met with death and pain, and they only leave behind this splendid name. And it goes on and on. And now Savitri has to see this. So this stone still figure of high and godlike pain, who is bound to his throne, he waits unappeased the daily oblation of her unwept tears. The oblation is the offering. And interestingly, I have heard Mother's tears when she would speak of this point of the transformation, which was like a razor's edge. And she would say, on the left, it was unbearable pain and suffering. And just moving that needle a little to the right was joy that we cannot even describe. And so we have this being wanting the daily oblation of her unwept tears, because she has to relive all this fierce question of man's hours And what are they? They're the sacrifice of suffering and desire that earth offers to the immortal ecstasy. And with Savitri, it begins again beneath the eternal hand. And it has not only been for Savitri, it has been for all the avatars who have come and brought something and had to suffer. And then someone else could read the next passage. Anyone. It's so powerful. And by the way, Edith, you read very beautifully, because these lines should not be rushed. They should be read slowly and deeply, with great inner feeling and aspiration. Yes, who's going to read?
Can I read?
Yeah, sure.
Awake, she endured the moment's serried march and looked on this green, smiling, dangerous world, and heard the ignorant cry of living things.
Well, I would like you to make me feel those three lines more, Ashwini. They sound like just a recitation at the moment. And I know you can do much, much better, because you have to let me know that she is awake, that she's enduring this moment's serried march, serried like this. And she's looking on this green, smiling, but dangerous world. And she hears the ignorant cry of living things, of all of us. Could you do those three lines again?
Yes, of course, yes. Awake, she endured the moment's serried march and looked on this green, smiling, dangerous world, and heard the ignorant cry of living things.
Much better, much better. Radhe, can you do the last four lines?
Amid the trivial sounds, the unchanging scene, her soul arose, confronting time and fate. Immobile in herself, she gathered force. This was the day when Satyavan must die.
And Sri Aurobindo hits us with that last line. He brings everything into focus. And it's the end of Book 1, Canto 1. And she hears the ignorant cry of living things. And amid the trivial sounds, the unchanging scene, because the scene is always the same on earth. It's always confrontations, wars, power, lust, compromises, etc. But her soul arises, and it confronts time and even fate. But she is immobile in herself. She's not moved by all of this. She's immobile. She has to endure the moment's serried march. She has to look on the green, smiling, dangerous world. She has to hear the ignorant cry of living things. And even amongst these trivial sounds and the unchanging scene, her soul arises to confront time and fate. Now, because she's immobile in herself, she is able to gather this force. And what is this force? Well, it has to be to challenge death, to confront death on her road, etc. Because it's the day when Satyavan must die. We haven't heard of Satyavan yet. Sri Aurobindo, as I've told you before, follows the epic line of the great poets and doesn't begin the story on page 1. The story of Savitri begins when she's a young girl, many books in the future. So we're getting a flashback here now of what is going to happen. And we are just hit with that last line. This was the day when Satyavan must die. Now that day is much later in the book. And we'll go through all of that because he is helping his parents, chopping wood in the forest when death comes. And he feels like the tree when it's cut with the axe. The pain is so powerful. And then what happens is that he comes over to Savitri and he says, perhaps because thou touchest, death may pass. And she holds him for a moment. But then it runs through him again. And there's a line where he just says, Savitri, Savitri, Savitri. That's all. And then she's aware that they're no more alone. So we get our first glimpse of what's going to happen. And as we go into Book 1, Canto 2, the issue, we are actually going to learn about Savitri's life. But we will see her youth and present time, what she has to do. So I'd like to begin with that because this canto is so extraordinary. What cantos aren't, but let us begin. Nilisha, could you read Canto 2, the issue?
A while, withdrawn in secret fields of thought, her mind moved in a many-imaged past that lived again and saw its end approach. Dying, it lived imperishably in her, transient and vanishing from transient eyes, invisible, a fateful ghost of self. It bore the future on its phantom breast.
Read a little bit more.
Along the fleeting event's far backward trail, regressed the stream of the insistent hours, and on the bank of the mysterious flood, peopled with well-loved forms now seen no more, and the subtle images of things that were, her witness spirit stood, reviewing time.
Oh, this is so extraordinary. We see that she is withdrawn now in these secret fields of thought, and her mind is moving through this many-imaged past, this extraordinary past where she lives again, and she sees the end approach. And dying, it lives imperishably in her. And transient even, and vanishing from transient eyes, invisible, a fateful ghost of self. It bears the future on its phantom breast. So all of this experience of her past lives, she is living again. She sees that along the fleeting events far backward trail, the stream of the insistent hours regresses, it goes back. And as it goes back, she sees on the bank of this mysterious flood that is peopled with well-loved forms now seen no more, and the subtle images of things that were. She actually sees these people. And I once had an experience with Sri Aurobindo in which he is walking towards me before he speaks to me, and he's talking to two people, one on his left and one on his right, and one is alive and one has passed away. Extraordinary. So she actually sees these people, these well-loved forms, peopled with well-loved forms, now seen no more, and the subtle images of things that were at one time. Therefore, her witness spirit looks and reviews time. Amazing that it reviews time. And I guess we should continue a little more and then we can go back over the lines. Someone else can read. We have a new person, please.
All that she once had hoped and dreamed and been flew past her eagle-winged through memory's skies. Should I continue, Narad?
Yeah, we want to say, we don't want to see flew past her eagle-winged, but flew past her eagle-winged through memory's skies. See, it's like the wings of an eagle are going past her. So you can read some more and read those two again, please.
Sure. All that she once had hoped and dreamed and been flew past her eagle-winged through memory's skies. As in many hued flaming inner dawn, her life's broad highways and its sweet bypaths lay mapped to her sun-clear recording view. From the bright country of her childhood days and the blue mountains of her soaring youth and the paradise groves and peacock wings of love, to joy clutched under the silent shadow of doom, in the last turn where heaven raced with hell.
Well, all that she once had hoped and dreamed and been. She had been all of these things previously. We don't know what she had been. We know that she was Joan of Arc, and we know that she was Queen Elizabeth, I believe. Anyone else remember from the agenda? I remember those two specifically. But all that she once had hoped and dreamed and been, because Mother said she was always here with us. She was always here since the beginning of the dawn of life, as was Sri Aurobindo. So all of these things flew past her, eagle-winged, through memory's skies. And then he says, as in a many-hued, flaming inner dawn, filled with fire and light, her life's broad highways and its sweet bypaths lay mapped to her sun-clear recording view. And what does that sun-clear recording view see? Well, from the bright country of her childhood's days, and the blue mountains of her soaring youth, and the paradise groves and peacock wings of love, to joy clutched under the silent shadow of doom in a last turn where heaven raced with hell. Well, so he gives us in those few lines a picture of her life. The bright country of her childhood's days, well, she's a princess. And she lives in this beautiful palace. Obviously, blue mountains of her soaring youth are there. And then the paradise groves and peacock wings of love. We have to feel, or at least I do, that this is where she's now with Satyavan. Because the peacock wings of love speak of Satyavan, and the paradise groves, well, they're in a forest with some open pastures, but mostly with the great trees. And so these paradise groves and peacock wings of love. What happens then? She has this joy, and she speaks about it in Book 7 very, very clearly. That joy is clutched under the silent shadow of doom. Because she's like a miser counting out her days with Satyavan. She's only given 1 year with him, and already time has gone by. And in a last turn where heaven raced with hell, well, she is the Heavenly Mother, the Divine Creatrix, and she is going to have to confront all of the problems of life and our existence by facing death and conquering him. So up until that point, we have just heard about Savitri. After that, we're going to go into a passage where Sri Aurobindo speaks of us. So let's go back to the beginning, and we can discuss the beginning of the issue. Whoever would like to offer something, you're most welcome to.
I think this is just now I discovered from that it could be related in the story to the Savitri, when Savitri stands for 3 days, in the solstice time, 3 days and 3 nights, she makes this silent offering, sacrifice, so to say, tapasya. She is not sleeping, she is not eating, not drinking for 3 days and 3 nights, according in Mahabharata.
This is Mahabharata, but not Savitri. That's correct, yes.
Right. But what is interesting that Sri Aurobindo, instead of saying about her standing, making tapasya, he makes this her recollection in the mind, in the day before the day Satyavan must die. So within this he gives us, actually he follows the same pattern. She is reviewing time. Within these 3 days when she stands there, she actually views all these things within herself. She sees the beginning of all this, all her life in this embodiment, and her life with Satyavan. She sees all that. She sees the meaning, and it comes to this one day at the end, yes, where 12 passionate months led in a day of fate. This is exactly this day. It's all gathered there. So within this, when does she do this kind of overview? She was living there every day actively with him and his parents in the forest, and now she has to have this time to overview. And I think this is quite possible that it relates to this time of her sacrifice or her consecration or concentration before the moment of Satyavan and dies, and so she prepares herself for this
Yes,
day.
that is correct. Yes, but understand that Savitri only the whole book encompasses one day. The
Right.
entire book of Savitri is one day. Interesting. So we have enough time that we could continue with this, because this is the next lines, about 7, 8 lines. He speaks of us, and he says, an absolute supernatural darkness falls on man sometimes when he draws near to God. An hour arrives when fail all nature's means. Forced out from the protecting ignorance and flung back on his naked primal need, he at length must cast from him his surface soul and be the ungarbed entity within. Well, there are so many things to speak about here. The absolute darkness, supernatural darkness. What is that, St. John of the Cross, who speaks of this? The clouds of unknowing. And then this happens sometimes when he draws near to God. I don't know that it happens to everyone, because he says only on man sometimes. But I know that all of us have gone through some kind of darkness, at least deep questioning, maybe even lack of faith, maybe perhaps pain, when prior to our drawing near to God. And now the next line is a problematic line for me, because, dear, this line in the early editions was, an hour comes when fail all nature's means. And they have changed it to, an hour arrives when fail all nature's means. It just doesn't work. And I've looked at all the early editions, and it's always, an hour comes. So, whatever. That hour comes when all of our normal means of nature fail us. Our hopes, our reactions, our turning away, our questioning. And then we are forced out from the protecting ignorance, because ignorance is truly a protection. It protects us from so many things. What I think Einstein said, something like, he said that, if I can bring it back, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. And he says, so is a lot. A lot of knowledge. So that hour arrives when fail all nature's means. And we are forced out from the ignorance that protects us. We are flung back upon our naked primal need. Everything is opened up. Everything is uncovered. We are bare to the divine. And at length we have to cast from us this surface soul, this surface being that is like all other surface beings and just goes through life without any deeper thoughts. And we have to become the ungarbed entity within. Wow. And you see, I believe that's a colon there. And Sri Aurobindo ends it with, that hour had fallen now on Savitri. So here she is. And we're going to learn so much about her and ourselves in these coming lines, because Sri Aurobindo goes between her and us constantly in this, mostly of Savitri, however. And I think it's very clear, this first page, that when he speaks about her experiencing all of the past, the subtle images of things that were, her spirit reviewing time and everything that she had been, and then everything is mapped to her sun-clear recording view. And all of these things he speaks of, her childhood days, her soaring youth, her love, and her joy that's clutched under the shadow of doom, in a last turn where heaven raced with hell. So these 12 passionate months that she's been with Satyavan, when she tells her father, after Narad says that he will pass away 1 year from this day, she said, if this is 1 year, then this year is all my life. And then he speaks of us, about this darkness that falls on us when we draw near to God. It can fall on us at any time. It can be with us most of our lives, but especially when we draw near to God. And this darkness of the soul. And therefore, there comes a moment when everything fails that we've used in our nature or of our nature. And we're forced out from this ignorance that has protected us. We're flung back on our naked primal need. And we have to cast from us our surface soul and be the ungarbed entity within. That hour had fallen now on Savitri. Any questions? Any comments?
So just want to ask one question here. So is this the purification process of the soul that's been described in depth?
No, I don't. It's an evolutionary process of the soul.
Okay.
Not a purification necessarily, an evolutionary process.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where we have the choice to draw near to God. But sometimes, and he says sometimes, he's very clear, that hour arrives when all nature's means fail. It doesn't always have to arrive, because Mother says there is the sunlit path. Still, there will be things that come up in front of us, but if we take them properly on the sunlit path, we're not affected by them. We're not depressed. But when that hour comes and all nature's means fail, and we are forced out from that ignorance that protects us, then we're flung back on our naked primal need, primal. And we have to cast from us our surface soul. Everything we knew that we were or thought we were, we have to cast from us in order to be this naked entity within, in front of the divine. And that hour had fallen now on Savitri. Because it's very important that we understand what she is going to go through in these next lines. Who would like to read? Anyone?
Okay, I can read.
Okay.
A point she has reached where life must be in vain, or in her unborn element awake, her will must cancel her body's destiny. For only the unborn spirit's timeless power can lift the yoke imposed by birth in time.
So we see that we all know what a yoke is, especially those of us who have lived in India. The two oxen are harnessed with a yoke and controlled through that yoke. So only the unborn spirit's timeless power can lift that yoke imposed on us by our birth in time. So Savitri reaches that point where life must be in vain, because unless in her unborn element she wakes and her will can cancel her body's destiny, but only the unborn spirit's timeless power can lift the yoke imposed by birth in time. So she has reached this point where life must be in vain, or, and big or, comma, in her unborn element awake. Her unborn element is her universal soul, not the psychic being, but her soul. In her unborn element awake, her will must cancel her body's destiny. Her body's destiny is to die. We've seen that and read that and heard that millions of times, that entropy is the only law on the earth. You're born, you die. Her will must cancel her body's destiny, for only the unborn spirit's timeless power can lift the yoke imposed by birth in time. That yoke is not imposed at other times. It's only imposed by birth in time. We are free other than that. It's only when we take birth that these great things come, these great possibilities and these great challenges. And only the self, with a capital S, that builds this figure of self, because each time we take birth, we build a new figure of self. We're not the same. It's not going to be the same personality that comes back. When Mother was asked, what about Beethoven? Wouldn't he come back as Beethoven? Mother said, no, not necessarily. He may become a shoemaker. It's just approaching the problem from a different perspective. How beautiful. Only the self, capital S, that builds this figure of self can raise the fixed interminable line that joins these changing names, these numberless lives, these new oblivious personalities, and keeps still lurking in our conscious acts, the trail of old forgotten thoughts and deeds. Disown the legacy of our buried selves, the burdensome airship to our vanished forms, accepted blindly by the body and soul. Well, we can't go further than that today because there's so much to cover here. So let's begin. To raise something, if a building is raised, it's completely demolished. Every brick, everything is. And then we'll find that line again, that word again, raised. Make a raised ground and shape anew her fate. So he uses the word raise once. Raise and raised. Okay. Only the self, the soul, that builds this figure of self, the personality of the present, can raise the fixed interminable line. So there's a line, obviously, through our births and deaths that joins all these changing names of ours and these numberless lives that we've lived and these new oblivious personalities we're not even aware of the past, and keep still lurking in our conscious acts, the trail of old forgotten thoughts and deeds. Disown the legacy of our buried selves, which is a burdenum airship to our vanished forms, that seems to be accepted blindly by the body and soul. Oh, it's so powerful here. Changing names, numberless lives, oblivious personalities. So only the self can raise that interminable line and disown the legacy of our buried selves, our burdensome airship. We do have an airship, a burdensome airship. We are heirs to some parts of our vanished forms, and from time to time we are aware of that something from the past triggers something. Oh yes, I remember that, but it wasn't in this lifetime. But Mother does caution us very strongly not to think about past lives, because she says that it often becomes an ego thing, and we shouldn't pay much attention to them, shouldn't want to even find them, because we live in a present and we look back to an unborn past, and how often do we live at the edge of the present and the future? Very rarely. Any questions?
I have a question, Narad. Only the self. So this is capital S, the unborn self.
Yes, this is the soul, the real soul, not the psychic being.
The unborn. And
that soul is not born, but it follows us in our birth and assists the psychic being, but it is unborn. It's eternal.
So only that unborn self can lift this yoke imposed by birth and time. And then below, accepted blindly by the body and soul. Here, I'm assuming soul is a psychic being.
The soul here is not capitalized. Huh?
Yeah.
So it's our being.
The psychic being. So that psychic being has no, this is just a new thought to me, this psychic being really has no role or play in being able to lift this yoke imposed by death.
Well, unless it comes to the front and leads the being. If it can come to the front, once this fellow who was, I think I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again, who was using a pendulum for many of the people in the ashram and friends who came. And he could tell people exactly what to do, what not to do. He could give them advice. And he got one man so deeply into the occult that the man died. And his closest friend went to Nolini and told him. And Nolini said very simply, the psychic being is our pendulum. It always knows right from wrong. It never makes a mistake. But it has to be brought from the front to the front and govern our lives. Then it can make the difference, all the difference. Until then, no. Until then, we're governed by desires and habits, etc. Sometimes it peeks through a little bit, and we have a glimpse of light and joy and the future, maybe even the divine. Any other questions?
I think what you address here with the soul and the unborn self is that the soul accepts this burdensome airship, kind of, it accepts the destiny of reincarnation because it actually created them. The psychic being envisions these future births and goes into them. It builds up the lineage, actually. It's a part of that experience in evolution. And to undo that fate, only the unborn self can do, not really the psychic being. The psychic being can invoke the undoing of that fate. And then when the self unborn enters, then it can change. Which is very rare. By the way, I wanted to mention this already, that this story of Savitri is one of the rarest in the epic literature, because every prediction is usually fulfilled. And here it is not fulfilled. What Narad predicted, that Satyavan must die and will die, did not happen. And it is so rare that I do not know any other example of epic story where this the prediction did not happen, because epic style is always the prediction, and then we see how it is done in time. And that's the whole. So you can see the whole Mahabharata, Ramayana, everything is built on this kind of style. But here the prediction is made, and we are watching for this to happen, and it doesn't happen. It's the only story where I know that
what doesn't happen?
The prediction of Narad, that Satyavan will die and nothing you can do about it. In Mahabharata story, it is exactly that he says that you cannot do anything. It's already sealed by the spirit. It is done, it is decided, and then it doesn't happen because Savitri.
Well, it does. You see, that is why Ashwapati prays to the divine to bring someone down who will change all of this, and that gift is Savitri. About your other point, I don't quite agree with your interpretation, but it has its validity. I think here, accepted blindly by the body and soul, is basically the spirit that accepts it because it is not yet the psychic being. The psychic being could change it when it is fully in front of the person. It may not have the range that the overmind would have, but certainly it could change things. So we will continue this next Sunday because it's a most wonderful story also of us and our present fate and our past and what can be done and what Savitri has to do also. So thank you all and namaste.
Namaste. Thank you, Narad, very much.